Have you ever asked yourself, why does life need oxygen to survive? The answer is the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is what allows us to be able to generate massive quantities of ATP from the high energy electron carriers that we have generated from glycolysis and the citric acid cycle. And so what I'm going to do in this video is walk through every step along the way in the electron transport chain. And to begin with, let's first describe what the process is called. It's called oxidative phosphorylation. Phosphorylation refers to the fact that we're generating ATP, and this oxidative term refers to the fact that we're oxidizing these two species, NADH and FADH2, and we're turning them into ATP. So these names are very intuitive once we understand the basic concepts behind them. And so the first thing that's going to happen is that NADH, which will come from glycolysis as well as the citric acid cycle, will enter something referred to as Coenzyme Q Reductase. And that is what I've drawn in yellow here. So NADH is going to be oxidized to NAD+, meaning that it's lost its electrons. And what's going to happen in this process is these electrons are going to be very high energy, and as these high energy electrons are lowered in energy, it's going to pump protons from the matrix within the mitochondria to the inner membrane space, also within the mitochondria. And so we're going to have these protons that move from inside to this inner membrane space, and these high energy electrons are now lower in energy, but they will be picked up by something referred to as coenzyme Q. And so this first complex is referred to as Coenzyme Q Reductase. And these names are intuitive because it is going to reduce coenzyme Q, and it also is referred to as NADH oxidase because it's oxidizing NADH, or NADH dehydrogenase. And what's going to happen next is coenzyme Q is a kind of shuttle, and as we know about the fluid mosaic model of membranes, these are all kind of floating around in kind of a quasi-like fluid. Coenzyme Q is going to take these electrons and move them to complex B. Complex B is called coenzyme, or actually cytochrome C reductase. And as the name implies, its purpose is to not only take these high energy electrons and move more protons from the matrix of the mitochondria into the inner membrane space, but also give these electrons to another shuttle within the phospholipid bilayer of the membrane, or of the mitochondria, and give it to cytochrome C. Cytochrome C is going to take these high energy electrons and then give them to complex C. Complex C is called cytochrome C oxidase. And as its name implies, its purpose is to take these high energy electrons from cytochrome C and move more protons into the inner membrane space of the mitochondria. And so hopefully what we can see by now is that we now have a very high concentration of protons within the inner membrane space. And as we know about from chemistry, as concentration profiles increase and we have an uneven distribution of protons, we're going to create something called a proton gradient. And these protons want to move from an area of high concentration back to an area of low concentration. These protons really want to go from the inner membrane space back into the matrix. And they can do that only by going through something called ATP synthase. And ATP synthase is this protein that will couple the movement of protons to a conformational change that will cause ADP and PI to come together. And then a final note I'll make about cytochrome C oxidase is that it is making use of your oxygen. The whole reason you need oxygen is because of cytochrome C oxidase. And so the big reaction that's occurring here is we're essentially forming water. We're taking 1/2 a mole of oxygen. We are taking 2 electrons that are moving through it, as well as 2 protons. And we're forming water. And because oxygen is so electronegative, it's one of the most electronegative species that exists in all of biochemistry, what's going to happen is this is going to be a very spontaneous process. This is a process that really wants to form water. And so that's the huge mechanism that is, from an abstract level, driving life. The fact that oxygen really wants electrons is what's causing all of these protons to enter the inner membrane space. So oxygen is the final acceptor of electrons in the electron transport chain. And so that's why you need oxygen, and that's where we're forming water in the process of cellular respiration. And so now that we've got this proton gradient, getting back to what ATP synthase is doing, is we're going to take an inorganic phosphate, it's commonly denoted P sub I. We're going to take an ADP molecule, it used to be ATP until it was hydrolyzed into ADP and PI, and we're going to now force this back into ATP. And this ATP molecule is what can now go on to actually facilitate and be coupled to other non-spontaneous processes to drive metabolism. To give an example of this, if we were to consider peptide bond formation in proteins, as we know we're all made up of proteins, that peptide bond involves a dehydration reaction. We're taking an amino acid, we're facilitating the N-terminal to perform a nucleophilic attack on the C-terminal, the sp2 hybridized carbon, because it is partially positive, and we're going to have to lose a water in that process. And to lose that water is considered a non-spontaneous process. It's not thermodynamically favorable. It won't happen on its own. And so if we have ATP present to cause that water molecule to want to leave by coupling it to peptide bond formation, we can actually synthesize the proteins that we need to survive. And that's just one example of why we need ATP so much. And if we don't have oxygen, we will die. So I hope this video helps out you guys who are interested in the electron transport chain. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.